Chapter 7. Work upon rigging, rope, knots, splices, bends, and hitches. Kinds of rope: spun yarn, worming, parceling, service, short splice, long splice, eye splice, Flemish eye, spindle eye, cut splice, grommet, single and double wall, Matthew Walker, single and double diamond, spirit sail sheet knot, stopper knot, shroud knot, French shroud knot, buoy rope knot, half hitches, clove hitch, overhand knot, figure of 8, bowline, running bowline, bowline upon a bight, square knot, timber hitch, rolling hitch, blackwall hitch, cat's paw, sheet bend, fisherman's bend, carrick bend, bowline bend, sheep shank, selvagee, marlinspike hitch, round seizing, throat seizing, stopping, nippering, racking, pointing, snaking, grafting, foxes, Spanish foxes, gaskets, sennet, to bend a buoy rope, to pass a sheer lashing. Those ropes in a ship which are stationary are called standing rigging, as shrouds, stays, backstays, etc. Those which reeve through blocks or sheave holes and are hauled and let go are called the running rigging, as braces, halyards, buntlines, clewlines, etc. A rope is composed of threads of hemp or other stuff. These threads are called yarns. A number of these yarns twisted together form a strand, and 3 or more strands twisted together form the rope. The ropes in ordinary use on board a vessel are composed of 3 strands laid right-handed, 1, or, as it is called, with the sun. Occasionally a piece of large rope will be found laid up in 4 strands, also with the sun. This is generally used for standing rigging, tacks, sheets, etc., and is sometimes called shroud-laid. A cable-laid rope, 2, is composed of 9 strands, and is made by first laying them into 3 ropes of 3 strands each, with the sun, and then laying the 3 ropes up together into one left-handed or against the sun. Thus, cable-laid rope is like 3 small common ropes laid up into one large one. Formerly, the ordinary 3-stranded right-hand rope was called hawser-laid, and the latter cable-laid, and they will be found so distinguished in the books. But among seafaring men now, the terms hawser-laid and cable-laid are applied indiscriminately to 9-strand rope and the 3-stranded, being the usual and ordinary kind of rope, has no particular name, or is called right-hand rope. Right-hand rope must be coiled with the sun, and cable-laid rope against the sun. Spun yarn is made by twisting together 2 or more yarns taken from old standing rigging, and is called 2-yarn or 3-yarn spun yarn, according to the number of yarns of which it is composed. Junk, or old rigging, is first unlaid into strands and then into yarns, and the best of these yarns made up into spun yarn, which is used for worming, serving, seizing, etc. Every merchant vessel carries a spun yarn winch for the manufacturing of this stuff, and in making it, the wheel is turned against the sun, which lays the stuff up with the sun. Worming a rope is filling up the divisions between the strands by passing spun yarn along them to render the surface smooth for parceling and serving. Parceling a rope is wrapping narrow strips of canvas about it, well tarred, in order to secure it from being injured by rainwater lodging between the parts of the service when worn. The parceling is put on with the lay of the rope. Service is the laying on of spun yarn, or other small stuff, in turns round the rope, close together, and hove taut by the use of a serving board for small rope, and serving mallet for large rope. Small ropes are sometimes served without being wormed, as the crevices between the strands are not large enough to make the surface very even, but a large rope is always wormed and parceled before being served. The service is put on against the lay of the rope. Splicing is putting the ends of rope together by opening the strands and placing them into one another, or by putting the strands of the ends of a rope between those of the bight. A short splice, 3. Unlay the strands for a convenient length, then take an end in each hand, place them one within the other, and draw them close. Hold the end of one rope and the 3 strands which come from the opposite rope fast in the left hand, or, if the rope be large, stop them down to it with a rope yarn. Take the middle strand, which is free, pass it over the strand which is first next to it, and through under the second, and out between the second and third from it, and haul it taut. Pass each of the 6 strands in the same manner, first those on one side and then those on the other. The same operation may be repeated with each strand, passing each over the third from it, and under the fourth, and through, or as is more usual, after the ends have been stuck once, untwist each strand, divide the yarns, pass 1/2 as above described, and cut off the other half. This tapers the splice. A long splice. 4. Unlay the ends of 2 ropes to a distance 3 or 4 times greater than for a short splice, and place them within one another as for a short splice. Unlay one strand for a considerable distance, and fill up the interval which it leaves with the opposite strand from the other rope, and twist the ends of these 2 together. Then do the same with 2 more strands. The 2 remaining strands are twisted together in the place where they were first crossed. Open the 2 last named strands, divide in 2, take an overhand knot with the opposite halves, and lead the ends over the next strand and through the second, as the whole strands were passed for the short splice. Cut off the other 2 halves. Do the same with the others that are placed together, dividing, knotting, and passing them in the same manner. Before cutting off any of the half strands, the rope should be got well upon a stretch. Sometimes the whole strands are knotted, then divided, and the half strands passed as above described. An eye splice. 5. Unlay the end of a rope for a short distance, and lay the 3 strands upon the standing part, so as to form an eye. Put one end through the strand next to it, put the next end over that strand and through the second, and put the remaining end through the third strand, on the other side of the rope. Taper them, as in the short splice, by dividing the strands and sticking them again. A Flemish eye. 6. Take the end of a rope and unlay one strand. Form an eye by placing the 2 remaining ends against the standing part. Pass the strand which has been unlaid over the end and in the intervals round the eye, until it returns down the standing part, and lies under the eye with the strands. The ends are then scraped down, tapered, marled, and served over with spun yarn. An artificial or spindle eye. Unlay the end of a rope and open the strands, separating each rope yarn. Take a piece of wood, the size of the intended eye, and hitch the yarns round it. Scrape them down, marl, parcel, and serve them. This is now usually called a Flemish eye. A cut splice. 7. Cut a rope in 2. Unlay each end as for a short splice, and place the ends of each rope against the standing part of the other, forming an oblong eye, of the size you wish. Then pass the ends through the strands of the standing parts, as for a short splice. A grommet. 8. Take a strand just unlaid from a rope, with all its turns in it, and form a ring of the size you wish, by putting the end over the standing part. Then take the long end and carry it twice round the ring, in the crevices, following the lay, until the ring is complete. Then take an overhand knot with the 2 ends, divide the yarns, and stick them as in a long splice. A single wall knot. 9. Unlay the end of a rope. Form a bight with one strand, holding its end down to the standing part in your left hand. Pass the end of the next strand round this strand. Pass the remaining strand round the end of the second strand, and up through the bight which was made by the first strand. Haul the ends taut carefully, one by one. A single wall, crowned. 10. Make the single wall as before, and lay one end over the top of the knot. Lay the second end over the first, and the third over the second, and through the bight of the first. A double wall. 11. Make the single wall slack, and crown it as above. Then take one end, bring it underneath the part of the first walling next to it, and push it up through the same bight. Do the same with the other strands, pushing them up through 2 bights. Thus made, it has a double wall and a single crown. A double wall, double crowned. 12. Make the double wall, single crowned, as above. Then lay the strands by the sides of those in the single crown, pushing them through the same bight in the single crown, and down through the double walling. This is sometimes called a tack knot, or a topsail sheet knot. A Matthew Walker knot. 13. Unlay the end of a rope. Take one strand round the rope and through its own bight, then the next strand underneath, through the bight of the first, and through its own bight, and the third strand underneath, through both the other bights, and through its own bight. A single diamond knot. 14. Unlay the end of a rope for considerable distance, and with the strands form 3 bights down the side of the rope, holding them fast with the left hand. Take the end of one strand and pass it with the lay of the rope over the strand next to it, and up through the bight of the third. Take the end of the second strand over the third and up through the bight of the first. Take the end of the third strand over the first and up through the bight of the second. Haul taut and lay the ends up together. A double diamond knot. 15. Make a single diamond as above, without laying the ends up. Follow the lead of the single knot through 2 single bights, the ends coming out at the top of the knot. Lead the last strand through the double bights. Haul taut and lay the ends up. A spirit sail sheet knot. 16. Unlay 2 ends of a rope and place the 2 parts together. Make a bight with 1 strand. Wall the 6 strands together, like a single walling made with 3 strands, putting the second over the first, and the third over the second, and so on, the 6th being passed over the 5th and through the bight of the first. Then haul taut. It may be crowned by taking 2 strands and laying them over the top of the knot, and passing the other strands alternately over and under those 2, hauling them taut. It may be double-walled by next passing the strands under the walling on the left of them, and through the small bights, when the ends will come up for the second crowning, which is done by following the lead of the single crowning, and pushing the ends through the single walling, as with 3 strands, before described. This is often used for a stopper knot. A stopper knot. Single wall and double wall without crowning, and stop the ends together. A shroud knot. Unlay the ends of 2 ropes and place the strands in one another, as for a short splice. Single wall the strands of one rope round the standing part of the other against the lay. Open the ends, taper, marl, and serve them. A French shroud knot. Place the ends of 2 ropes as before. Lay the ends of one rope back upon their own part, and single wall the other 3 strands round the bights of the first 3 and the standing part. Taper the ends as before. A buoy rope knot. Unlay the strands of a cable-laid rope, and also the small strands of each large strand. Lay the large ones again as before, leaving the small ones out. Single and double wall the small strands, as for a stopper knot. Round the rope, worm them along the divisions, and stop their ends with spun yarn. A Turk's head. 17. This is worked upon a rope with a piece of small line. Take a clove hitch slack with the line round the rope. Then take one of the bights formed by the clove hitch and put it over the other. Pass the end under, and up through the bight which is underneath. Then cross the bights again, and put the end round again, under and up through the bight which is underneath. After this, follow the lead, and it will make a turban of 3 parts to each cross. 2 half hitches. 18. Pass the end of a rope round the standing part and bring it up through the bight. This is a half hitch. Take it round again in the same manner for 2 half hitches. A clove hitch. 19. Is made by passing the end of a rope round a spar, over, and bringing it under and around behind its standing part, over the spar again, and up through its own part. It may then, if necessary, be stopped or hitched to its own part. The only difference between 2 half hitches and a clove hitch being that one is hitched round its own standing part, and the other is hitched round a spar or another rope. An overhand knot. 20. Pass the end of a rope over the standing part and through the bight. A figure of 8. 21. Pass the end of a rope over and round the standing part, up over its own part, and down through the bight. A bowline knot. 22. Take the end of a rope in your right hand, and the standing part in your left. Lay the end over the standing part, and with the left hand make a bight of the standing part over it. Take the end under the lower standing part, up over the cross, and down through the bight. A running bowline. Take the end round the standing part, and make a bowline upon its own part. A bowline upon a bight, 23. Middle a rope, taking the two ends in your left hand, and the bight in your right. Lay the bight over the ends and proceed as in making a bowline, making a small bight with your left hand of the ends, which are kept together, over the bight which you hold in your right hand. Pass the bight in your right hand round under the ends and up over the cross. So far, it is like a common bowline, only made with double rope instead of single. Then open the bight in your right hand and carry it over the large bights, letting them go through it, and bring it up to the cross and haul taut. A square knot, 24. Take an overhand knot round a spar. Take an end in each hand and cross them on the same side of the standing part upon which they came up. Pass one end round the other and bring it up through the bight. This is sometimes called a reef knot. If the ends are crossed the wrong way, sailors call it a granny knot. A timber hitch, 25. Take the end of a rope round a spar, lead it under and over the standing part, and pass 2 or more round turns round its own part. A rolling hitch. Pass the end of a rope round a spar. Take it round a second time, nearer to the standing part. Then carry it across the standing part, over and round the spar, and up through the bight. A strap or a tail block is fastened to a rope by this hitch. A bend, sometimes called a rolling hitch, is made by 2 round turns round a spar and 2 half hitches round the standing part, but the name is commonly applied to the former hitch. A black wall hitch, 26. Form a bight by putting the end of a rope across and under the standing part. Put the bight over the hook of a tackle, letting the hook go through it, the center of the bight resting against the back of the hook, and the end jammed in the bight of the hook by the standing part of the rope. A cat's paw, 27. Make a large bight in a rope, and spread it open, putting one hand at one part of the bight and the other at the other, and letting the standing part and end come together. Turn the bight over from you 3 times, and a small bight will be formed in each hand. Bring the 2 small bights together, and put the hook of a tackle through them both. A sheet bend, 28. Pass the end of a rope up through the bight of another, round both parts of the other, and under its own part. A fisherman's bend, 29. Used for bending studding sail halyards to the yard. Take 2 turns round the yard with the end. Hitch it round the standing part and both the turns, then hitch it round the standing part alone. A carrack bend, 30. Form a bight by putting the end of a rope over its standing part. Take the end of a second rope and pass it under the standing part of the first, over the end and up through the bight, over its own standing part and down through the bight again. A bowline bend. This is the most usual mode of bending warps and other long ropes or cables together. Take a bowline in the end of one rope, pass the end of the other through the bight, and take a bowline with it upon its own standing part. Long lines are sometimes bent together with half hitches on their own standing parts instead of bowlines, and the end seized strongly down. A sheepshank, 31. Make 2 long bights in a rope, which shall overlay one another. Take a half hitch over the end of each bight with the standing part which is next to it. A selvagee. Lay rope yarns round and round in a bight, and marl them down with spun yarn. These are used for neat block straps, and as straps to go round a spar for a tackle to hook into, for hoisting. A marlinspike hitch. Lay the marlinspike upon the seizing stuff, and bring the end over the standing parts, so as to form a bight. Lay this bight back over the standing part, putting the marlinspike down through the bight, under the standing part, and up through the bight again. To pass a round seizing. Splice a small eye in the end of the stuff. Take the other end round both parts of the rope, and reeve it through the eye. Pass a couple of turns, then take a marlinspike hitch, and heave them taut. Pass 6, 8, or 10 turns in the same manner, and heave them taut. Put the end through under these turns, and bring it out between the 2 last turns, or through the eye, and pass 5, 7, or 9 turns, one less than the lower ones, directly over these as riders. The riders are not hove so taut. Pass the end up through the seizings and take 2 cross turns round the whole seizing between the two, passing the end through the last turn and heaving taut. If the seizing is small cordage, take a wall knot in the end. If spun yarn, an overhand knot. The cross turns are given up now in nearly all vessels. After the riding turns are passed, the end is carried under the turns, brought out at the other end, and made fast snugly to the standing part of the rigging. A throat seizing, where rigging is turned in, is passed and made fast like the preceding, there being no cross turn. A neat way to pass a throat seizing is to pass the turns rather slack, put a strap upon the end of the rigging, take a handspike or heaver to it, and bear it down, bringing home the seizing with a mallet and small fid. Stopping is fastening 2 parts of a rope together as for a round seizing, without a crossing. Nippering is fastening them by taking turns crosswise between the parts to jam them, and sometimes with a round turn before each cross. These are called racking turns. Pass riders over these and fasten the end. Pointing. Unlay the end of a rope and stop it. Take out as many yarns as are necessary, and split each yarn in 2, and take 2 parts of different yarns and twist them up taut into nettles. The rest of the yarns are combed down with a knife. Lay half the nettles down upon the scraped part, the rest back upon the rope, and pass 3 turns of twine taut round the part where the nettles separate, and hitch the twine, which is called the warp. Lay the nettles backwards and forwards as before, passing the warp each time. The ends may be whipped and snaked with twine, or the nettles hitched over the warp and hauled taut. The upper seizing must be snaked. If the upper part is too weak for pointing, put in a piece of stick. Snaking a seizing is done by taking the end under and over the outer turns of the seizing alternately, passing over the whole. There should be a marlin hitch at each turn. Grafting. Unlay the ends of 2 ropes and put them together as for a short splice. Make nettles of the strands as before. Pass the warp and nettles belonging to the lower strands along the rope, as in pointing. Then the nettles of the upper strands in the same manner. Snake the seizing at each end. Foxes are made by twisting together 3 or more rope yarns by hand and rubbing them hard with tarred canvas. Spanish foxes are made of 1 rope yarn by unlaying it and laying it up the other way. Gaskets. Take 3 or 4 foxes, middle them, and plait them together into sennet. This is done by bringing the 2 outside foxes alternately over to the middle. The outside ones are laid with the right hand, and the remainder are held and steadied with the left. Having plaited enough for an eye, bring all the parts together and work them all into one piece, in the same manner. Take out foxes at proper intervals. When finished, one end must be laid up, the other plaited, and the first hauled through. The name sennet is generally given to rope yarns plaited in the same manner with these foxes. Sennet made in this way must have an odd number of parts. French sennet is made with an even number, taken over and under every other time. To bend a buoy rope. Reeve the end through the eye in the other end, put it over one arm of the anchor, and haul taut. Take a hitch over the other arm, or take a clove hitch over the crown, stopping the end to its own part, or to the shank. To pass a sheer lashing. Middle the lashing and take a good turn round both legs at the cross. Pass one end up and the other down, around and over the cross, until half of the lashing is expanded. Then ride both ends back again on their own parts and knot them in the middle. Frap the first and riding turns together on each side with sennet.